Welcome to Covered, a podcast that helps you figure out what the hell is going on in the news and how you feel about it.
Here to guide you through the biggest stories of the week. As always, we are your hosts, journalists Jodie Lee and Annie Puller.
On this week's episode, we dive into calls for independent Teal MPs to form their own political party.
Also, the controversy surrounding neurosurgeon Dr. Charlie Teo.
And the very savage fallout from the enhanced games, or the steroid Olympics, if we can call it that. But first, let's go to our honourable mentions, the stories that are worth getting your head across but don't quite warrant a deep dive.
Yeah, and our first one is incredibly sad this week. AFL icon, MND advocate, and Australian of the Year Neil Daniher has passed away. Daniher died after a 13-year battle with motor neurone disease. It's a fight that saw him and his family together establish the Fight MND organisation, and they managed to raise more than $115 million to find a cure. Daniher will be formally and publicly farewelled next month at a state funeral in Victoria.
This next one is genuinely wild. 5 people who became trapped in a flooded cave in Laos while searching for gold have remarkably been found alive. Rescuers actually had to crawl hundreds of metres through these really narrow tunnels to reach them. They now face the incredibly difficult task of getting them out through those same narrow tunnels.
And it wouldn't be an episode of Covered without me desperately trying to sneak in a rugby league story. Of course, this week it is the Origin upset last night. The New South Wales Blues coming from behind to clinch the win in Game 1 of the 2026 Origin series. It was James Tedesco that managed to seal the deal for New South Wales. The final scores were 22-20, but it was also an emotional night with Queensland naming newly retired player Jai Arrow as their 20th man. Of course, Arrow recently found out and announced that he is living with motor neurone disease.
Yeah, and that's probably a good segue to our next story, moving from one upset to potentially another upset, if we can call it that, that's brewing in the political landscape at the moment, because there are currently calls for a new political party to be established in Australia, but one that is actually made up of sitting members of Parliament. Jodie, please explain.
Yes. So our listeners might be familiar with that teal wave that swept right across Australia during the 2022 federal election. They were independent candidates who saw enormous success running in what were traditionally Liberal-held seats. So inner city kind of affluent electorates where the Liberals had really held on for decades.
I think what made them so remarkable was their pitch, how loud and far-reaching that pitch was. As we know, most MPs are bound by their party. They really vote how the party room decides. They don't necessarily vote how their electorate wants or how their community desires. And major parties, really rely on these big donations, which also come with very big expectations. The Teals essentially rejected that entire benchmark. No party room, no obligations, really putting it down to one quite straightforward strategy, which is we just want to answer to our community. And it worked in a way that I think genuinely shocked the political establishment at the time.
Well, the Teal campaign, that Teal tidal wave, if you will, was certainly a very new model for Australian politics. And there was one businessman who was behind it. He launched a crowdfunding campaign. His name is Simon Holmes Court, and that's where a large amount of the funds used by these Teal candidates came from. It helped them to finance and coordinate their local campaigns. But critically, it didn't actually try to control what they say, which is the point that you were making about party politics.
Yeah, and so if I'm right, now some of those same independents are essentially asking whether it's time to form a political party of their own and band together, really strengthen numbers is their approach here.
Yeah, and I guess we need to understand potentially what's changed in order to understand why they might be thinking of doing that in 2026. So since the 2022 federal election, when we saw these Teals come to light, One Nation is obviously surging in the polls. We've discussed this many, many times. A poll just this week has suggested that One Nation could win as many as 59 seats in the lower house if an election was held today. So that would make them the main opposition party, which is a huge threat both to the Liberal Party, to Labor, but also to independent candidates. Now, with the Liberals really struggling to find their own way, struggling to identify themselves and really struggling to gain traction with voters, nobody really stands to effectively counter that one nation swing. And that's this kind of vacuum that the Teals, I guess, are hoping to fill.
Yeah, I mean, there's also got to be a practical trigger right here as well, which is dollar signs, because the Labor government changed campaign financing laws after the election with Liberal support, which was essentially capping donations to individual independent MPs. But party structures can still spend on national campaigning. Allegra Spender, a Teals MP, put it really bluntly, the changes tipped the balance away from these independents towards the major parties, essentially putting all the political power into the major parties. And she thinks that was exactly their intention.
Yeah, the other thing that this is also about, I was reading, is a path to the Senate. So the Senate is really critical in politics. It's where sort of real power over legislation sits. It's the chamber that can sort of block, amend, or demand changes to laws before they pass. So independents who hold the balance of power there have historically punched well above their weight. The problem is that the Senate voting system heavily favours registered parties. And so unregistered independents almost never or very rarely get over the line in the Senate. So forming a party for these independent Teal candidates would change those odds really dramatically. I think the thinking, as far as I'm aware at this stage, is for them to try and target much smaller states. So the ACT and Tasmania, places where a senator can represent that state but still maintain a really strong hold and a genuine interest in local issues, which is what the Teals have stood for from the very beginning.
And a very prominent figure in this Teal camp, Zali Steggall, has really been leading the charge here, but she's been very careful about what exactly she is proposing. She doesn't want a traditional party structure, at least that's what she's implied so far, where MPs are bound by the party room and effectively lose their ability to speak freely or vote independently. The whole point is to grow their reach without giving up the independence that got them elected in the first place.
So Zali Steggall's a supporter. The other supporter I found really interesting, and this is where my cynicism comes into play here, is Malcolm Turnbull. The former Liberal Prime Minister has been one of the most vocal advocates for these Teal independents rallying together as a political party. And he's done all this while still maintaining his membership with the Liberal Party, despite their efforts to oust him from the party. So it's all very complex. Why would a current member of the Liberal Party be advocating for huge competition by way of Teals bandying together? My sense of skepticism, as I said, is that Turnbull has always been trying to ruin the Liberal Party since they stabbed him in the back as Prime Minister. But yeah, look, his view is that the Teals are the perfect people to kind of fill the vacuum left by the Liberal Party.
Yeah. So what Jodie's essentially saying is that this is a hit job and this is Malcolm Turnbull's time to really seek his vengeance. But
well, he's had like 50 cracks at it. It's hard not to see this as an effort to do that.
Respect for, persistence beats resistance. That's what they say. But really, if we get to the crux of this plan is already starting to show cracks, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the Teals themselves can't even agree. Like they came to light as independent candidates. We can't honestly expect them to come together as a team and start singing from the same song sheet. So Steggall, Spender, Sophie Scamps and Nicolette Boll, I think is how you say her name, have indicated openness. So they're kind of on board. But then you've got Monique Ryan in Melbourne and Kate Chaney have said no outright. They're not interested. There are also several regional independents who've also said it's just not for them. So Monique Ryan, never minces her words. She was incredibly direct. She says she has no intention of running next election as anything other than a community independent for Kooyong.
Yeah, and it's no surprise the opposition has gone straight for the throat here on integrity. Deputy Liberal leader Jane Hume said that the independents campaigned on doing politics differently, being unorthodox, and now they're doing it exactly the same way as everyone else. Shadow Treasurer Tim Wilson was actually a little bit more dismissive, saying it's about their own survival and certainly not the good of the nation, which sort of goes to the very crux of what the Teals are trying to do here, which is saying that they are the faces and voices of the community.
Yeah, I think that's why the Liberals' attack has so much sting, because it's exactly what these Teal independents are wrestling with themselves. Scamps apparently came out publicly and said that she was disappointed that the plan became public before she had a chance to consult with her community. So she was clearly undecided on the issue before it came to light. Apparently she's now planning sort of kitchen table conversations across her electorate before deciding where she stands on the issue, and a few others are doing the same. So certainly undecided.
Something tells me it's going to be a while before we see a party form here. But what's actually been floated sounds kind of less like a traditional party and more like a coordinated movement of sorts. It hinges on this sort of shared alignment on core issues, but also saying that you can go your own way when your community needs you to differ. And obviously, as you pointed out before, they still want that Senate presence. So whether you can build all of that and still credibly call yourself independent is, I don't think, the question that anyone has fully been able to answer yet.
Well, maybe it's exactly like a traditional political party, because it's a group of people who say they're on a team and can never agree with one another.
That sounds
So
about
maybe
right.
actually it's perfect.
Job done, tick. Yeah, they've ticked all the boxes with that one. They're on the right track.
All right. And on that note, why don't we move to our next deep dive story for this week?
Well, speaking of institutions and the people who feel somewhat locked out of them, we want to talk about controversial neurosurgeon Charlie Teo. His name has been back in the headlines this week, and I think it's worth trying to unpack the story behind all of this because there is a lot to it.
Yeah. So what brought Teo's name back into the headlines this week is an Australian family who've basically gone public saying that their seriously ill young son will die if Charlie Teo can't operate on him. No other neurosurgeon in the country will perform the type of surgery that this young child needs. And his poor, desperate mother told 7 News this week, if we don't take this risk, the tumour will take my son. That's the choice that we have. So they're now facing the prospect of having to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars to send their son overseas to be treated by Dr. Charlie Teo, who is an Australian surgeon who trained here, who worked here for many, many years, and who really wants to help them here on home soil.
Yeah, and I think to understand how they've ended up in that situation, you really need to understand who Charlie Teo is. He's a 68-year-old Sydney neurosurgeon, 40 years in the game, over 11,000 brain tumour surgeries to his name to date. He essentially pioneered keyhole, minimally invasive surgery, and I'm no medical expert here, but through our research, we understand that that's smaller incisions, less damage to surrounding brain tissue, and the ability to reach tumours that other surgeons simply just can't get to. So for many patients that were told that their tumour was inoperable, that there was nothing left that could be done, he really became the last call. He became that last glimmer of hope.
Yeah, but his methods have also been very controversial. So firstly are his fees. He's charged significant fees, as high as $35,000 for some patients, many of whom are dying and desperate and seeing Teo as a last resort, as you said. So then he had 2 patients who died in surgery in 2018 and 2019. Neither of them regained consciousness after their brain surgery. The New South Wales Healthcare Complaints Commission found that in both cases, the risks of operating outweighed any potential benefits. That Charlie Teo failed to obtain proper informed consent from his patients, and that when one patient's daughter confronted him after her mother's death, he told her that she should be grateful. The committee found that her account was credible.
And this really came to a head a few years ago in 2023. That's when he was found guilty of unsatisfactory professional conduct. So the finding wasn't that his surgical skills were the problem. It wasn't around his skills relating to being a neurosurgeon. It was that in those 2 cases, the risk really outweighed any potential benefit, and that his consent process was just too optimistic and promising, that he essentially gave patients more hope than evidence actually supported.
Yeah, and they imposed very difficult restrictions on him continuing to operate in Australia. They basically said for him to continue, he would need written pre-approval from an independent neurosurgeon before performing certain high-risk surgeries. So in practice, no Australian hospital would ever facilitate that. So basically what happened was, rather than stop operating, he moved to China and they built a hospital there. Apparently, he's since performed 236 surgeries all across the world, this week. He said 202 of them were classed as excellent, 28 as good, 4 as fair, none were considered poor according to his own records. And he says 2 of his patients did die within 40 days of surgery.
God. And what I didn't know this week was that he actually still comes back to Australia to consult with patients. He obviously can't undertake surgeries here, but he's still traveling back and forth to meet with patients who are so desperate to speak with him. And that is actually what has potentially landed him in really hot water. He's now facing a permanent ban in Australia. So auditors essentially have gone through his files. He believes that he could be found to have breached his conditions, not for actually performing surgery here, but for consulting with these Australian patients and recommending that they actually go overseas to have these surgeries. And under his restrictions, he wasn't even allowed to suggest that a patient needed an operation while in Australia. So an auditor has essentially told him directly, patients' lives may have been saved, but that's not the point here. The point is that you breached your restrictions.
You broke the rules.
Yeah.
The other allegation that's followed Charlie Teo everywhere he goes is that he's in it for the money. And it's something that he really hasn't been able to shake, particularly given the astronomical fees that he charges desperate people. His very good friend, he has lots of friends in high places. One of them is Karl Stefanovic, the media personality. Karl now has his own podcast and he featured Charlie on the podcast. And this is what Dr. Teo had to say about that cash grab allegation.
All the rhetoric and all the accusations about doing it for money. Well, sadly, I know why they're saying it because a lot of doctors do things for money and money drives them. But money has never driven me. I mean, I've never said this publicly, but, you know, as a full-time busy neurosurgeon in Australia, well, more than a third of my patients, I never charged them. I never said it because I didn't want the people who I charged to feel bad about paying. But, you know, pensioners, I never charged them, fellow doctors, nurses.
God, I can't help but find him so compelling, but even more compelling are his patients, the people that he works with every day. And one of his patients here in Australia is a mother of 6, Tanya Miles. She was diagnosed with glioblastoma, which is the deadliest of all brain cancers. And she actually traveled overseas to have Teo operate on her and says she now has the best possible chance of spending years, not weeks, with her 6 children. I mean, she was relieved she listened to her gut and angry that she couldn't make that choice at home because she's essentially had years added onto her life.
This is the ultimate moral dilemma, right? Because essentially when you whittle it down, it is an argument between hope and between clinical rules. That's what we're dealing with here. There's no arguing Charlie Teo's surgical ability. The findings have never really been about his skill. They were about his judgment, potentially saying that he made the wrong call with certain patients, presumably, if you believe him, because he wanted to give those patients some glimmer of hope. Obviously, he has naysayers who say it was about the cash. But, you know, you think about a family facing the prospect of losing their mum of 6 or losing their young child who is living with this brain tumor that every other doctor has said is inoperable. And then you have someone like Dr. Charlie Teo saying, look, it is difficult, but I'm happy to try it. And he isn't able to do that here in Australia. Like, it is difficult to reconcile. He's also not technically banned. He's registered still. So the system has effectively removed him by making it so difficult for him to operate. But he hasn't actually been banned in the traditional sense of the term, which means there's no real clear appeals process. So the pathway to coming back also seems very unclear.
Yeah, I mean, he's effectively been shut out, and even in that extended interview that he gave with Karl Stefanovic, he said that, while he's obviously incredibly disappointed with how this has all transpired, that it's actually pushed him to build a new life overseas, to go into different medical areas, to consult with patients on depression and mental health. I think your argument around this moral dilemma really goes to the core of why this story is still lingering and why people care so much. I mean, on the one hand, you have these families who are facing the prospect of losing their children. And then on the other hand, you have, experts who essentially testified at his hearing who put it extremely plainly, basically saying a surgeon does not have a license to undertake any conceivable procedure, even with the agreement of the patient. So what he's really saying is patient choice matters enormously, but it does not override a doctor's obligation not to operate when the risk outweigh the benefits. I don't know. It's just so complicated. But
it's so hard. I always say strong opinions loosely held, but I don't know how I feel on this one. It's impossible for me to put myself, thankfully, in the position of somebody who is so desperate to stay alive. So I understand on the one hand why they would want to take the risk, but at the same time, as a patient, you want to know that you're going under the knife with a doctor who plays by the rules. Oh, I don't know. He's either kind of like a genius or he's a maverick.
I know, but maybe he is both, and maybe we don't know the answer and we just have to accept that. But let's move to our last story of the week. Honestly, a little bit lighter, a lot more hubris. It has to be our favorite, the enhanced games. It is literally that ludicrous. It happened on Sunday night in Las Vegas. And if you haven't heard of it yet, well, the chances are that you will.
Yeah, let's paint this picture for you. So I want you to close your eyes. Picture the Olympic Games, the pinnacle of athletic prowess. Now I want you to strip back every rule about performance-enhancing drugs, throw the entire thing in a casino at Las Vegas, and you have the enhanced games. It's so wild. It feels like something that AI has created, truly. But it was actually founded...
It's robotic.
Yes. It feels like something you'd ask ChatGPT to build for you. But no, it was an Australian businessman who came up with the idea, obviously an Aussie by the name of Aaron D'Souza. His pitch is basically elite athletes are already doping in secret anyway, according to him. Definitely not my opinion. So why not do it openly? Let's see what the human body is capable of achieving with a bit of artificial assistance. And subsequently, 42 athletes signed up for the challenge. There were 12 events and up to $25 million in prize money to be won.
And there is some big money backing this. You have Donald Trump Jr., along with Peter Thiel, who is the billionaire co-founder of PayPal, one of the most influential and controversial figures in the Silicon Valley. So the ownership group of this is valued at $1.2 billion. This is like a full-blown movement that's happening right now, almost as big as AI, actually. That's probably an exaggeration, but they spent $50 million on this first event in front of 2,500 people. Tickets were not on sale to the public.
Yes, it was like a curated audience of select guests. There was also some massive DJ set I was reading. Anyway, we digress. So the centerpiece of the enhanced games was the 50-meter freestyle, and there was $1 million bonus for anyone who could beat the world record in this event. The face of the event, obviously, and this is just where it gets so good, was Australian swimmer James Magnussen. He is a former world champion, a triple Olympic medalist, so he is the real deal, one of the greats of Australian swimming. But Kieran Perkins, another great of Australian swimming, who some people might not be old enough to remember, but I certainly do, called Magnussen's involvement in the enhanced games borderline criminal, to which Magnussen's response was, "Juice and a suit. Happy days."
I'm sorry, that's just so cringe.
Oh, it's so good. Just keeps getting better. Roll the tape. Roll the tape.
Yeah, no, you really have to see this to believe it.
So wait here, expect Proud in the blue suit in the middle to get off to a good start. He gets off to an absolute flyer. So Proud takes it down. Can Colomede close the gap? They get past the 25. Proud still in control. Colomede coming now. That world record, 20.88. They're stroke for stroke. Proud, Colomede, Proud world record. 20.88 record. New world record.
I'm sorry, but the whole thing is just so American. And I realize you're listening to this so you can't see it, but Magnussen actually turned up in a gold swimsuit. He came last by a whole body length. So yeah, that's how it went for him.
Also, what you would have missed if you were only listening to the audio of that is it's a 4-lane swimming pool. 4
Oh,
lanes.
a 4-lane. You're spending $50 million and you're delivering 4 lanes. I'm sorry. I think I had better in my freaking grade 1 school swimming carnivals.
Built in the car park of a Las Vegas casino, but yes. Tell us about the results of the race, if you will.
As we mentioned, Magnussen obviously finished last in that one. He also came
Bless
last
him.
in the 100-meter freestyle, so a shocker day for him in the pool. When he first went on his drug protocol, he actually overdosed. He started sinking in the pool. That is just a whole nother story that we could do a podcast on. They needed horse equipment to measure his lactate because the human device maxed out. So on the night, no suit actually fit his body.
Hence the arrival in the
gold.
gold number.
I mean,
What do they say? Dress for the role you want, the job you want, not for the job you have. Well, good on him. Didn't work. So obviously you saw there that a Greek swimmer just edged out the world record, which is held by Australian Cam McAvoy. McAvoy swam that distance just 9 weeks ago, clean, so without drugs, in a very normal suit, breaking a record that had stood for 17 years. The Greek swimmer did it obviously doped to the nines in a super suit that's been banned in the Olympic sport for 15 years. And McAvoy actually kind of took the piss a little bit. He took to social media and apparently posted a Gordon Ramsay meme that said, seriously, that's all you got.
I mean, that's incredibly diplomatic from an athlete who just broke the world record 9 weeks ago in China and wasn't paid a cent. But here's the thing that actually blows my mind. Of the 79 individual performances on the night, just 22 PBs were set. And this is even wilder. 3 event winners actually took no drugs at all. So the whole crux of this event was that they were drugged up and that it was set to prove how far the human body and the limits could be pushed. And on a night where drugs were the entire point, well, in 3 cases, the drugs didn't even deliver. James Magnussen actually gave an interview to Channel 9 after this event, which he's been advocating for several years. And this is how that played out.
I'm always super optimistic, so I always aim to win, but there's bigger opportunities involved in this than just the prize money on the night.
And last question, what's the future for the Enhanced Games, do you think, in this whole movement?
The future for the Enhanced Games, it's a huge movement. It's all I've seen on the internet for the past 3 days. It's going to take over. It is an industry.
Sorry, just because your algorithm is feeding you the same content does not mean it's a big deal. That's the first thing I'll say there. What the internet spits out is not an indication of what is hot the world over.
In his world, all he's seeing is the Enhanced Games.
Bless him. So a few takeaways from this for me. The first is that while peptides might not make you stronger or faster, they do all look very good. Credit where credit's due. He looks like Johnny Bravo from the Cartoon Network.
He's doing well. He's doing well, but the hair is doing weird things. I don't know.
I don't know if we can blame that on the drugs. But he does raise an important point, albeit he did contradict himself. But it does get me thinking. He talks a lot about the money. And for me, that might be the crux of what's happening here. You know, you've got to look at the fact Cameron McAvoy, we spoke about him, the Australian that had just broken the world record. He was paid $20,000 for that, and not from the sport. He was paid through a fund that Gina Reinhart, the Australian billionaire, set up for our professional swimmers because they make no money doing what they love and are so good at. So you've got to then question why people like James Magnussen would be getting involved in something like this in the first place. The guy that won his heat walked away with $2.8 million. British swimmer Ben Proud said it would have taken him 13 years of world championship wins to earn what he made in one night in Vegas, jumping into the pool. So for me, that's sort of like, it's easy to laugh at these athletes for trading their integrity for this, you know, spectacle, if you will. But these are people who have given their lives to a sport, given their bodies to a sport, dedicated themselves to this art form, and we haven't really been able to remunerate them properly. So I don't blame them for wanting to get involved, really.
Yeah, and I mean, they control what they put in their bodies, and if it's something that they want to be a part of, then it's ultimately their decision. I'm not so offended by the cash grab in this instance. I think what really worries me about this whole movement is the precedent that it actually sets, because sport only means something because the rules are the same for everyone. The moment you change your body with substances, you're not really measuring who the best athlete is. You're kind of measuring, I don't know if this is being too harsh, but you're measuring who has the best pharmacist. And for me, it kind of just, I don't know, it throws a dagger through the crux of why I love sport so much.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I see it as separate to the mainstream sport that we know and love. Like, I'll never compare them to times set during the Olympics or during the Swimming World Championships. But my heart sort of goes out to them because these are people that have competed on all those main world stages, and now they've had an opportunity to, I don't know, set themselves up for life doing something that they really love. I don't love it for sport. I don't love it as a spectator. I certainly am not buying a ticket. But I can sort of empathize and see where they're coming from. The other thing for me is that, you know, there's a lot of outcry about whether or not this is promoting the use of peptides and performance-enhancing drugs. But it's like, isn't social media already doing that? I literally need to log on to TikTok for 5 seconds for somebody to be telling me that my skin could be better, I could be losing weight, I could be fitter in the gym if I just, you know, took a stack of peptides. I'm not saying whether they're right or wrong, but I don't think it's only the enhanced games that are responsible for that. If anything, the enhanced games feel like a response to something that's been happening for a little while.
No, I hear you, but I also think something like the enhanced games really glorifies the content and the push of all of these, you know, steroids and peptides and everything else that you're starting to see online. It kind of drives this performance enhancing product movement. And when you have a founder of an event like this standing on stage with strobe lights and house music telling the crowd that, you know, the old rules don't apply and that, you know, this is the new way forward, that they've been held back by humanity, I just think that's kind of dangerous. Like, that's not a sports organization. That is a product launch being dressed up as really good marketing.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Maybe we need to call it something different. Maybe it's not competitive sport. Maybe it's advertorial or influencer marketing. I don't know. But just a warning, by the way, Magnussen wants to bring this to Australia.
Oh, well, shit. Should we start injecting?
Oh my God, no thank you. No, no thank you.
It's like imagining you on the block at the enhanced game.
What, in a gold swimming suit?
My mind has just gone to a really great place.
Get your mind out of the gutter, girlfriend. And while you do, I just want to congratulate you on our 10th episode of Covered.
Yay! We finally got here, and we're so happy to be doing this every week with our audience. We're so grateful for the feedback, for the story recommendations, and we really hope you enjoyed this week's episode.
We'll be back next week. See you then.